So we're back to LA Fishguys here with Jeff Macare at Reef Dynamics. He's showing us the differences and benefits of certain types of designs and materials used in protein skimmers. Also, we discussed a little bit about the water pump and the means of getting the air into the protein skimmer. We're now at the point where we're beginning to discuss the specifics about the materials and how protein skimmers actually work and what they do. Now, what do you got there in your hand there, Jeff?
This is Skimmate.
Ooh, stinky stuff.
Not to be consumed by human beings, unless you have a wish to vomit.
Yeah, pew.
Quickly. Anyhow, what I thought I'd show you is how the skimmer reacts to dissolved organic compounds.
Okay.
These have obviously been fractionated, but we'll put them back in so they have to be refractionated.
Okay.
But anyhow, we just pour this in. Watch what happens to the skimmer.
You can already see those bubbles are starting to settle down.
You'll even see the color of the water start to change. As the the colored material starts to rise.
And it's now starting to push it back out. That's pretty quick, actually.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the more efficient protein skimmers are going to have that very quick reaction. One unique element of our products is the way we rate them, and we have very conservative ratings. And rating a protein skimmer, that's another big question people ask us. How do I choose a protein skimmer for my aquarium? And to me, my answer is always the biggest one you have space for and the biggest one you can afford. Because at the end of the day, it's about how quickly you're removing waste.
Right.
The quicker you remove the waste from the system, the less waste is going to dissolve or become converted into nitrate, which ultimately is what you're trying to avoid. Granted, looking back at those comments about design, if the skimmer's too big, the next too large is not going to function, too small, etc., etc. But for example, this model here is rated for 180 gallons. But it would compare to other manufacturers that would probably rate it up to 500 or 600 gallons.
Okay.
So you put this in a 500 or 600 gallon tank, surely it's going to be, taking out waste 24/7, but it's never going to catch up to the bio load. And when we rated these systems, these skimmers, it was based upon an experience that we had that showed us that if, for example, when we clean the tank, the skimmer would start to act like this, and start to create a lot more fomate and start to fill up. And then after a while, though, it would just stop and idle.
Right.
And sit there and percolate. And at that point, we knew that the skimmer had removed everything that was available. And over time, it would start to slowly, when you fed again or when you stirred up the sand or something else, it would start to kind of reproduce, produce more stuff. So this is going to start overflowing. And it's just going to be kind of a clear skimmate. See a little bit of darkness in there.
Now, what we're seeing, if I can kind of butt in here, is we've made no adjustments or changes to the protein skimmer. This is the results, and it has occurred within 60 seconds of pouring that stuff into the sump here, yes?
Yep.
So this skimmer is already attempting to drive out of the water what we just poured in.
Yeah, and you can also see there's a change in the density of the foam in the body.
Okay.
The more organics, the more foam and smaller bubbles are being produced. You get less turbulence as well.
Okay.
There's more foam and more bubbles being produced. But once this finishes removing that waste from the water, which will probably be within a couple minutes here, you'll just see this head just drop down.
Okay.
And maybe you can pan back to it later. You'll see the cup full, but nothing coming out of the protein skimmer.
Okay. And that's because it's driven those organics out of the system.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, in this particular example, we just poured that in there.
Right.
But in a real reef tank, you might have live rock or something in there that's slowly leaching or allowing those organics to enter the system.
Or fish or corals.
Or fish or corals. I mean, there's always going to be a continual waste source.
Exactly.
Now, do protein skimmers catch up to the waste level in the tank?
They can if they're sized properly, and that's the thing. I mean, if, for example, like I said, if I put this skimmer in a 500-gallon aquarium, it's going to skim like crazy.
Right.
And I'm going to have to set it so that it's creating a very heavy, dry fomate so that I don't get a lot of water out of it. And you can see this is a very wet fomate.
Right.
That's why there's a lot of water coming out of it. Sorry, it's a little bit too wet. Let's open it up a little bit so it slows down. But so if I put this skimmer in a 500-gallon tank, it's going to be working overtime, and it's never going to ever catch up.
Okay.
So then if I took and, say, for example, put that skimmer on there.
Sure, the big monster.
Right. That would probably remove all the waste from a 500-gallon tank in about 2 hours, and then it would stop.
Right.
So, because that's rated for 4,000 gallons.
Okay.
So again, there certainly is it's important to choose the right size skimmer, and again, with the caveat in mind, you really can't go too large.
Okay.
On the skimmer within, of course, reason. So.
Now, let me ask you a question, and this is kind of a question that I always have myself when I sit down to do someone's tank. I've got a tank that's got a footprint of, let's just say, 6 foot by 24 inches. So I'm only going to be able to fit a protein skimmer or a sump of a certain size or a certain width into that cabinet below. Also dependent upon the height of that cabinet, obviously there's going to be certain limitations. So I guess my question is, quite often I've always felt that I was not putting the size protein skimmer that was recommended for the tank, but at the same time I was putting the maximum physically, the maximum size skimmer I could physically fit into the sump.
Sure, and that's a very, very common problem. I mean, every day I get phone calls from people saying, what skimmer should I get? And the first question I ask them is, well, what space do you have in your sump?
Right.
How tall is the cabinet?
Right.
Because again, my real answer is the biggest one you can afford and the biggest one you have space for.
Exactly.
And here's just a real basic, foundation for system design. Build it around the skimmer.
Okay.
Build it around the skimmer. Take a look at the tank you want to have. Figure out which skimmer is going to be best for that tank. And a lot of people will go a step up. Like, there's lots of people who, for example, if they have a 180, they'd say, well, what's the next biggest skimmer? I said, well, a 250. Well, that's the one I want.
Okay.
Or even a 300.
Right.
Because they know, because of their experience, that if they get a bigger skimmer, it's going to be more efficient on their
Sure.
system. So then you design the system around that.
Okay.
So if the skimmer requires 15 inches by 12 inches, you make sure that the sump you buy
Right.
has 15 by 12 inches.
And of course the cabinet is going to have to accommodate that sump as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and honestly, at that point, most standard systems slash sumps that are designed on the market aren't designed with that in mind.
I was going to say, most of them come out, they're about 12 inches wide, period.
Yeah, they're just not designed, and I think, well, frankly, it's poor design. The manufacturers of the systems don't really have in mind
Protein
skimming,
skimmers, right.
And that's because it would appear that there's not much thought beyond the box,
Right.
And more about system design. And,
Right.
In humility, I mean, I've designed about 300 aquariums. I did what you do for a long time.
Right.
Built tanks all over the United States, and that was always number one. Is let's get the biggest skimmer we can afford,
Right.
and fit in there. Let's design it around that,
Right.
and that led to a lot of success because the skimmer is so functionally important.
And if needed, you can, assuming you've got the space, get a longer or wider sump to accommodate that protein skimmer.
Absolutely.
Don't necessarily have to order just something that's standard or off the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems it's a bit silly when you look at someone and they're going to go out and spend $5,000 on a 300-gallon Starfire tank,
Right.
But they don't want to spend $1,000 on a sump,
Right.
or
Get that
$1,000 on a protein skimmer.
$300 standard one right off the shelf.
Exactly.
When they should be spending a little bit more money and getting something that's going to accommodate a bigger or better protein skimmer.
Yeah. And certainly I'm not for waste.
Sure.
But make sure you do it right. And actually, this is a good lead into another very common question can you ever overskim an aquarium?
Okay.
And my answer to that is no.
I would kind of think the same thing too.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is because the defense you'll hear for those who say you can is that you're removing good stuff from the tank, trace elements.
Right.
And the truth is that this is where that happens. When you see this clearish skimmate, this means that there's a low concentration of dissolved organic compounds and a high volume of water.
Okay.
Okay. The more water is in here, the more trace elements you're removing from the system.
As opposed to if that was thick, dark green pea soup stuff, I would have, what, less trace
A
elements?
lot less, yeah. Because then you have a higher concentration of dissolved organic compounds and less water.
Okay.
And the other side of that too is that, so what if you remove some trace elements? You can put them back in.
Right.
Get all the bad stuff out first.
Right.
Put back the good stuff.
Right.
So that idea of overskimming, I've never subscribed to that.
Let's talk a little bit about the materials used and the shape of protein skimmers.
For materials, acrylic I think is the best for sure, and a lot of that comes from my experience with using PVC in the early days of when I was designing protein skimmers. And I was part of designing a product that's very popular right now, but that uses PVC material. And we built some prototypes, and what we found is that the PVC on the inside, if you rub your hand on the inside, you'll feel that it's ribbed. It has a texture to it.
All right, let's stop for a second and define what are typically the different materials that are used in a protein skimmer.
Well, popularly it's acrylic.
Okay.
That's like 90%.
Okay.
And then PVC, clear PVC would probably be the next.
Okay.
And then beyond that, polyethylene, polyurethane, for very large container type cylinders. But for our purposes, that's pretty much acrylic.
Okay. And you were just referring a moment ago to the PVC about it being, you said ribbed on the inside?
Yeah, it has a texture to it.
A texture, okay.
And that's because of the extrusion process. It's basically pulled out of an extruder, and that leaves marks in it. And in PVC, those marks actually are very defined, and they have a texture to them. And what ends up happening is, what we found is we built 2 skimmers, one out of acrylic and one out of PVC, set them side by side, same pump, same system, everything. And what we found is that the skimmer made with PVC wouldn't develop the same sort of a foam head as the one with acrylic. And we also found that the bubbles in the acrylic skimmer were consistently small from the reaction chamber through the transition to the neck, versus in the PVC skimmer we found that the bubbles were larger. And we figured out what was happening was, as the bubbles are moving through the chamber, those bumps, those textures, are actually causing the bubbles to kind of stop up and collide with each other.
Okay.
And so the collision was causing the formation of larger bubbles. Now, granted, I'm not saying it's going from 0.5 millimeter to 2 millimeters, but in skimming, and when it comes to efficiency, 0.5 millimeter to 3/4 of a millimeter is a big difference. It's a 50% change in diameter, and that all translates to efficiency. So that's the primary reason why we don't use PVC and never have.
Okay.
Is because of that. It is affected. Can you still make a good skimmer with PVC? Sure, but with the cost differential not being that dramatic.
Okay.
Especially with extruded acrylic, which is made with a similar process, but is by nature, because of the polymeric nature of acrylic, it's very smooth still. And then if cast, of course, is like glass. So.
Polymeric. Now there's an impressive word. I actually looked it up and it means having many sides. Goodness gracious. I was impressed with the foam coming out of the protein skimmer when he poured the stuff back into the system. But make it a point to come on back for part 5 if you want to look for impressive. We're talking about shapes of skimmers.